Good morning or good day, everyone. Could you progress to the next slide? Thank you. My name is Jeremy Martin. I'm a doctoral student at the University of California, Berkeley. Before I get started, I would like to thank SREE for this incredible opportunity. I'd also like to thank Bethany Miller and Jenny Achilles, who were the client partners that I worked with on this project. Also to Sarah Rakow, who was the SREE appointed advisor, and to my own advising team here at Berkeley, Dr. Janelle Scott and Dr. Travis Bristol, who were also important. So my project this summer focused on assessing philanthropy's role in policy change. There were three sort of broad guiding research questions that we comprised to help tackle how do we measure philanthropy's role. The first one was sort of like definitional. How do we think about policy advocacy? What do we think about policy goals? And what do these things look like throughout the life of a grantee-grantor relationship? And then also, what does failure look like? How do we think about failure in the policy advocacy process? The second was, well, given that there are policy goals, there may be policy impact that one is seeking to achieve, what are some indicators of success along the way? Do we focus singularly on the broad impact that an advocacy project is seeking to achieve, or are there some other intermediate factors that we should also consider? And then the final one is, what does policy advocacy evaluation look like? If there are some evaluative methods that have been used traditionally, and then have they been successful? And if not, what might we look to as guidance on how we can successfully evaluate advocacy nonprofits? Next slide. So there were a few recommendations that came out of this work. The first one regarding definitions. Policy goals are just simply those, let's say that an advocacy nonprofit wants to achieve a legislative victory. Achieving the legislative victory is the policy goal, but the impact is, what does that legislation achieve? So for example, if an organization is striving to impact Congress, achieving the legislation is the goal, but maybe broadly they want to end poverty, or maybe they want to erase or eradicate segregation in schools. Failure is the inability to achieve either the policy goal or the policy impact. But the literature suggests that we have to reconceptualize failure as learning opportunities for either the foundation to engage in continuous improvement, or maybe the nonprofit to say, well, maybe we weren't able to achieve the legislative goal, but maybe we can achieve our policy success through some other tactic. Multiple measures of advocacy success are critical. If you're just looking at the legislative goal in a context where passing legislation is difficult, where there are multiple sort of venues in which policy advocacy is taking place, then you want to be able to track, well, was there a constituent mobilization that was built? Did the nonprofit leader gain some new knowledge or expertise? Were they able to hire staff who were knowledgeable about the issue? So thinking about not just focusing on whether or not the policy goal was achieved, but were there these intermediate markers of success that were also evident? And then finally, traditionally in policy impact measurement, the randomized control trial is the gold standard. But because policy advocacy takes place in decadal timeframes, because there are multiple policy venues, because there are all these challenges and hurdles that policy advocates can face in an advocacy journey, a randomized control trial may not be best suited for policy advocacy. So more qualitative evaluative frames that include focus groups, interviews, surveys, ethnographies, observations, those may be better equipped to help provide some guidance on how well or how successful an advocate may have been in the policy process. And lastly, final slide. There's a some key takeaways for me is there's embedded throughout every part of the policy advocacy definition process, all the way through evaluation, notions of race and power remain a critical framework for understanding how philanthropy involves itself in policy advocacy. Foundations are necessary and critical partners in achieving policy goals, but engaging nonprofit leaders as equal partners, and not just nonprofit leaders, but also those communities that are directly impacted, to help define those goals, to identify the intermediate measures of success are critical. And then also people of color, or people who, nonprofit leaders of color, nonprofit leaders from historically marginalized backgrounds, remain disadvantaged in the grant making process and policy evaluation process. So thinking more critically and comprehensively about how do we support those kinds of organizations, and the issues that those organizations champion are still remain important for the field. Thank you.